Hello and welcome to the award-winning Power and Politics podcast. I am Tom Eschen. Thanks as always for joining us, talking about the issues that impact you the most with the officials, the advocates, everyone in between that are making those decisions and also calling for change along the way too and holding them accountable as well. Today we speak with Julie Tighe. She is the president of the New York League of Conservation Voters about Governor Hochul and one of her last acts of 2025, rescinding the 100-foot rule when it comes to natural gas, which she thinks is the ripple effect of that, and also where New York is when it comes to energy policy in the state with that CLCPA, whether or not New York will reach those goals, and what she thinks about all of that. Thanks as always for watching and listening. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts at the Power and Politics podcast page or watch on YouTube at CBS 6 Albany. We're joined today by New York League of Conservation Voters President Julie Tighe. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's start with as we look forward into 2026, we come out of course, a year of legislation and what have you. A lot of talk about the energy policies in New York State. Governor Hochul just signing to rescind the 100-foot rule. Can we start just first by explaining what that is and why that was something that you and environmentalists like yourself are pushing to be rescinded?
Sure. So the 100-foot rule is a law on the books that says that if you're building a new building and it's located within 100 feet of an existing gas main, the utility is required to connect you to that gas main, and all of the rest of the ratepayers pay for that expense. So like when you're building a house, you pay for, your appliances and things like that, but everybody else pays for a gas line if you want to connect to that. And so this rule, which is called a rule, but it's a law, has now been repealed going forward, starting a year from now, where if you want to connect to gas, you have to pay for it instead of everybody else. And this has been costing ratepayers about $600 million a year in new connections. So we know that this is going to be something that moving forward will stop adding to the bills that ratepayers are paying.
It's an issue of costs, but also, of course, the environment and incentivizing or de-incentivizing, right? That's part of this move and this push by people like yourself.
I think it's about leveling the playing field, right? Right now, right? If you want to have electric, obviously you're being connected to that. But if you get electric appliances, you're basing it on that. Whereas we're getting a discount basically for people who are connecting to gas. Really, we want to be moving in this other direction. It's cleaner. It's more affordable for people to have electric appliances, especially the new ones are much more efficient. So we know that this is something that will help us to reduce pollution not only outside in the environment, but also inside your homes, right? Our friends at We Act for Environmental Justice did a study that showed that kids who live in houses that have gas appliances are more likely to have asthma and to be exposed to pollutants like nitrogen dioxide. So this is really something that it's a health issue for families. It's also a pollution issue for the environment, and it's a cost issue for ratepayers.
Let's get back to the cost itself, because you have seen those on the opposition of this in the past say, well, this is just going to cost more for the individual, or the utility company is just going to say, this is going to cost you more. National Grid, one of those companies, saying an upstate New York homeowner would face $7,000 in additional charges to connect to its gas network because of this. How do you respond to some of those claims that no, this is actually going to cost someone more?
Well, what is going to cost them less is them having higher efficiency heat pumps, for example, as a way for them to heat and cool their home. That is much more efficient than using a natural gas furnace, for example. It will cost them less to pay for their utilities over time. Right now, we're paying for two systems. We're paying for a gas system and an electric system. That's one reason why our utility bills are so expensive. So we know that this is something that's going to be more cost effective for homeowners, and they're going to be making the decision to go in that direction instead, right? We know that the people who benefit the most from a transition away from fuel to electric are actually people who are on delivered fuel. So people who are on propane or heating oil, it's much more cost effective for them to switch to heat pumps than it would be to switch to the gas in between. So this is something that we know can be done and can be done cost effectively.
What about the argument that it would hinder new development?
It would not hinder new development, and there's no ban, right? To your point, and we
Sure.
just said, you can connect to that. You have to pay for it rather than all of the other ratepayers paying for that. So that is very clear. And there's nothing that would stop a development from happening that way. New homes are increasingly moving towards all electric buildings, anyways. And we have a law on the books that's I looks like it's going to go into effect in 2027 that requires all new construction to meet those standards, anyways, with limited exceptions that allows that the state can allow for that if it's needed. But this is really the direction that consumers are moving in this way. You see that in the fact that heat pumps have been outpacing the sale of furnaces for a number of years now here in New York, and we know that they work very effectively, even in cold winters.
Yeah, and just to add on what you said, the changes only apply to residential buildings and do not prohibit new gas hookups as a part of this. You mentioned all electric. We just saw a big conversation about that through some litigation when it came to the All Electric Buildings Act. When it comes to, of course, rescinding the 100-foot rule, and now that, and then the whole conversation about the energy policies in general, where do you put all of this right now? Where is New York State when it comes to complying with the CLCPA?
Sure. So the climate law has a number of goals that are both short-term goals and long-term goals. We're a little behind on where we need to be for the energy generation. Partially, that's because more energy is being demanded. Partially because the Trump administration is trying to stop the development of renewable energy, even though the president claims that there's an energy crisis. We just saw last week they put a stop work order on offshore wind. Meanwhile, we have two projects that are in development right now that combined would be enough energy for 1.1 million homes. Right, that is a lot of clean energy that's supposed to be coming online, that's in construction, that's being paused. So we know we're ahead on solar, and we know that there's more that we can do on solar and help streamline that. That is a really big issue. I think we haven't done enough on reducing pollution and emissions from transportation. We've been advocating for a clean fuel standard for transportation, similar to what's being done in California and Oregon and Washington State, that will help to transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable fuels and electric vehicles. That we really need to get on. That's something that won't cost consumers more dollars, won't really cost the state any money other than administering a program. That's something we need to be doing more of. And ultimately, we need to advance the Clean Air Initiative, which is a program that will cap emissions over the entire economy and continue to advance progress to reduce pollution across all of the different sources of pollution. So there's things that we need to do. We definitely need to ramp things up because we're a little behind. And we'd like to see us making more progress. Certainly, passing the 100-foot rule is something that we need to do. We also need to make a plan for how we're going to ultimately make a transition off of natural gas and onto renewable fuels and electric in a much more complete way.
You talked about more energy being demanded, talked about the Trump administration. I've heard also supply chain, pandemic. There's a few other factors that I've heard from both sides of the aisle that have led to delays or the slowly being able to implement and meet these goals. I'll start with the administration. Have they done enough to adapt to this at this point?
Look, I think that they're trying to move in a way that will help to reduce the costs for consumers. And I think that the governor has been steadfast in her support for offshore wind and making sure that's advancing and continuing to make sure that we meet these goals on solar, which we're actually ahead of on that front. There is more that we can be doing, as I mentioned, a few things. A clean fuel standard for transportation, making sure that I believe that they have a what they're calling a Tiger team to help make sure that as many renewable energy projects are permanent so that they can start into construction and get the tax credits that the Trump administration and Congress has decided to repeal starting next year for clean energy. Again, even though we need to do stuff, and I think they're trying to make sure that the state can benefit from as many of those tax credits as possible. I would like to see some more work done on the energy front to make sure that we're advancing, getting to cleaner air. That's something that is everybody supports. We know that. We were excited actually last 2 weeks ago now, I guess. On a kind of holiday time, right? The Con Edison was required by the Public Service Commission to look at a bunch of alternatives to help address some energy shortfalls and some energy infrastructure needs. We want to make sure that there's policy to enable that across the state, so that we're really making that big step forward. And I think that the governor certainly has been moving forward in that direction. And I think we're going to continue to see progress, but there's always more that we can do. And of course, we need the legislature in some cases to pass bills also to help advance the goals of the climate law.
You've heard the governor in the past few weeks, months talk about an all of the above approach. Sort of saw that in writing with the energy plan a few weeks back now. Is that the right way to go? Is that a step forward? Is that any progress?
Look, I think that we are very reliant right now on gas, and that is something that's volatile, and the prices of gas fluctuate, and we don't have control over that. And we need to be expanding our zero emissions advancement. So certainly, we can't afford to lose our nuclear power plants, for example. Those are a huge support source of zero emissions power. And we do need to continue advancing how much clean energy that we're developing. And I think that there's a real commitment, and we want to make sure that the governor is fully committed to that. But I have seen her being committed to advancing renewable energy and trying to, adjust what we need to do to get those projects. As you noted, we've had some struggles because of the pandemic and because of supply chains and inflation that has impacted all of the energy sector. And I think that we're going to continue to make progress on that going forward.
It's an interesting conversation because we've heard him say that the PSC chairman several times that this climate law is not causing any strain or cost to go up. It's more of the aging infrastructure and what
That's
these
right.
utility companies need to do. So with that, I ask, how much is this on utility companies? What is their role in all of this in this conversation right now?
Look, utilities aren't the ones who are providing the energy, right? They're bringing it to your door, to your house, but like the cost of that is one component. There's sort of two components to your bill. One is a delivery charge, so the infrastructure needed to bring that energy to you. The other piece of it is the generation of the energy itself, right? The energy generation is something that renewables we know are going to make our costs steady, right? Because the once you constructed it, the price is the same. The wind doesn't cost more money next year or 10 years or 20 years from now than it does today. And the same thing with solar. So those are things that we know. And we're really excited that our first offshore wind project, South Fork Wind on Long Island, is really delivering and at a very reliable and steady rate. And the costs are going to be the same for 25 years because we know all of that. I think that the utilities are trying to figure out how do we get energy to us efficiently, and that means we're going to need more battery storage to help support that and to help fill in the gaps. It means we're going to need a bigger energy system to bring us all the electricity. I mean, we need more of that to be localized. So having a more uh, I'm blanking on the name of it right now. Distributed energy, right? We want to have more localized energy. That's when like you have rooftop solar or community solar, so it doesn't have to travel as far. And we need to make sure that the incentives that the utilities are provided by the state law and by the Public Service Commission will move them in a direction that's most efficient for them. So I think that sort of we need all the parties to come to the table and make sure that we're advancing energy in a way that's most efficient, both from a perspective of reducing pollution and also for customers who are thinking about how are they paying for all their bills.
When the legislature is putting bills together and looking at solar or wind or what have you, should there be more specific in how and where in the permitting when it comes to that? We've heard some, especially in rural upstate New York, say, well, why are you putting solar panels in this field? You're ruining this population of animals here. Why not just put it on the top of this mall or a part, like you mentioned, parking lot or where a building, rooftops? Does there need to be more of a focus on where and how it's being done?
I think that we can do things to streamline how permitting is going for rooftop solar, for example, to make it easier. There's a bill that we've been advocating called Solar App that would enable a local government to use technology to automatically issue permits as long as they're within the zoning that the town has adopted. We think that would streamline permitting because we're spending a lot of time on consultants rather than time and money on consultants instead of that being built faster and getting onto people's roof and generating energy. So that's something that we know that the legislature can do. We're not going to have enough energy from rooftops, right? There's just not enough rooftop. We can certainly do more, and that's exciting. But we are going to still need utility scale, solar and wind. Very often, farmers are want to lease part of their property for those purposes, and they are working on things that can help co-located work. So, for example, it's easy to have sheep or goats grazing underneath solar. That is something that's been studied and can be done safely, and we're seeing things that can be thriving like that. So, I think there's, you know, only developers only use land that people want them to use. They're not using eminent domain in order to advance these projects. So I think sometimes there's a little bit of NIMBYism about some of those issues. But certainly we all need the energy.
NIMBYism always rears its head. It often
Yeah, it
does.
does. It does. I think
You
there's when you look at that, as you know, I worked at the State Department of Environmental Conservation, and really the people who come out to meetings are people who are opposed to something. There are a lot of people who are usually the silent majority who support projects, but they don't come out to say that. So I think we do need to have more people come out and say, yes, I want this clean energy in my backyard because I don't want my family to be breathing in the dirty air that's coming from fossil fuel that is otherwise what we're relying on.
So to wrap this up, I guess from the beginning of the conversation, 100-foot rule.
Mhm.
It's hard to keep track of the Heat Act as it's been kind of split into a bunch of different pieces.
Sure.
How much of the Heat Act has been actually signed into law at this point?
A third.
A third. Okay.
So one third,
Original Heat Act, I should
right.
say. Yeah.
Originally, the New York Heat Act had three components. One is the 100-foot rule, that the governor just signed that we've been talking about. Second is putting a cap on how much people pay for energy, so that it's trying to limit it to 6%, which is the state's goal. But it was trying to make it more firm and put that in law. And then the second component to this is the obligation to serve, which is that requirement that you provide that energy. And we want to make sure that we're addressing that to make sure that there's alternatives like thermal energy networks are a different way of heating and cooling that are highly efficient in certain neighborhoods that we could be advancing. And we're starting to make some progress. Actually, we got some funding for SUNY Albany, my alma mater, to switch to electric chiller thermal network for their air conditioning that will help them get off of gas for that air conditioning. So we see there's a lot of different things being pursued, and it's really exciting to see that happen. But there's more work to do.
Yeah.
I will also just mention one thing when people talk about how clean energy they feel like is disrupting the landscape. But do you ever ski at Jiminy Peak?
A Jiminy Peak?
Yes, in Massachusetts.
Maybe. I'm familiar with
Yeah.
it.
Well, Jiminy Peak has a turbine right on the ski slope, and you ski right by it, and it's very cool. I've done a lot of night skiing there, and it's very cool to see it. And actually, Jiminy Peak is able to make snow longer than other mountains are because their energy is coming from that wind turbine. So that is costing them less money to make snow, right? Which hopefully this winter we won't need to make as much snow. Feels like maybe winter's going to cooperate, but it really is a beautiful sight to see, and I think we have to think about, the visual impacts of clean energy in a different way.
Your focus as we head into 2026, what will be some of the initiatives that you are advocating for?
We're advocating for more money for the what's called the Sustainable Future Fund, which is the largest investment that the state has made singly into climate change. The Governor Hochul advanced that this year. It was $1 billion. We're hoping that she'll do another $1 billion in 2026 to help advance that. As I mentioned, we want to keep moving towards adoption of the Clean Air Initiative, which will establish a program to cap pollution across the entire economy and create incentives and investments for things like heat pumps, very efficient heat pumps, for investing in clean energy infrastructure, for advancing electric vehicles, including electric buses. So that is a big priority for us. Want to continue making progress on solar, including increasing our goal from solar because we already met it. We met it early. It's time for us to double down on that, make it 20 gigawatts instead of 10 gigawatts. We have to make sure that we're continuing to get these offshore wind projects advanced and battery storage projects moving forward. And we'd like to see, more incentives for solar really to help us continue making progress on that front. So there's a lot of work to do, and that's just in the sort of the climate and energy space of our work. There's a lot of other things that we need to do in other parts of the environment as well.
You might have alluded to it there, but anything the governor could say in her state of the state that you really want to hear?
I really want to see another $1 billion for the Sustainable Future Fund. Really want to see her commit to a multi-year investment in water infrastructure for $4.5 billion. We're hoping over 5 years. We know that our communities need more investment in water infrastructure. We'd really like to see something to advance progress on solar in particular.
All right. Julie Tighe, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Great, thank you, and Happy New Year.
You too.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.